Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. I hate to say it. I said it on Sunday. Arkansas basketball, and maybe more specifically, John Calipari, I'm going to go ahead and, until further notice, call them the dark cloud, the rain cloud of college basketball, because at the end of the day, it just feels like every time you talk about them, it's in a negative light. It's in a negative manner. I'm not a negative person by nature, but it's even dragging me down as somebody who covers it on a night in, night out basis. Okay. And so I bring it up because we talked about them to end Sunday's show. And I basically said, look, I know it's not pretty right now, but we put up the stat about they only had a 10% chance to get an at-large bid to the NCAA tournament. And I said, let's pump the brakes here. I said, you look at them, one great win against Michigan, that's it. But no bad losses, no quad 2, quad 3, quad 4 losses. Those are the worst kind of losses you can have on an NCAA tournament resume. And I just said, it's too early to freak out. Beat LSU, regroup, you're going to be fine. LSU was the next game on the schedule. LSU was also 0-3 in league play. LSU transparently is a less talented roster than Arkansas. And I said, just beat LSU, you're going to be fine. Well, I bring it up because Tuesday night in Baton Rouge, that game was played, Arkansas LSU. It was not pretty, and it was not pretty, especially if you were an Arkansas Razorbacks fan. Final score in this game, 78-74. LSU wins. Arkansas now falls to 0-4 in SEC play. They are alone in last place in the SEC. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. It is not good. Now let's go ahead and get into the game. One thing I do want to say, because there was one play that to me really kind of signified like just, it wasn't, let me put it this way. I don't think it was the best night for SEC officials, but there was one play that just signified just, man, it's just things are going not in the right direction right now, okay? So Arkansas trails 53-52. I think there's about 8-9 minutes to go. Trevin Brazil gets called for a moving screen. Now, I do think it was a foul call. I don't think you can deny it was a foul. He kind of pushed off, whatever. Matt McMahon, the LSU coach, immediately goes to the ref. He waves his finger, which insinuates, hey, you should go to the monitor and check that for a flagrant foul. Okay, we cannot show you the video on YouTube. I apologize. There's copyright rules, all that good stuff. But the point I'm trying to make is it was probably a questionable foul at best, probably was a foul, but it wasn't like a super obvious can't miss foul. But there was no doubt when you watch this thing live, like, oh, that's not a flagrant. Like, okay, well, it'll be a 2-second monitor trip. We'll come back. Well, whatever. Well, I bring it up because they go to the monitor and they wait and they wait and they wait some more. And guess what ends up happening? They call a flagrant. It ends up being a 5-point possession for LSU. And that was just the metaphor for the game and maybe so far SEC play for Arkansas. Arkansas was down by 1 point when that call was made. It was an egregious, awful, flagrant foul call. And when they got the ball back, they were down by 6. They end up losing by 4. And I'm not saying that is the reason that Arkansas lost, but I will say that was an abominable call. It was an embarrassing call. And like I said, it was just a metaphor for the season. Now, to be clear, there's a difference between reasons and excuses. This is not an excuse. That is not the reason that Arkansas lost this game. But let's go ahead and just dive into the game itself, because I think what would be frustrating to me if I was an Arkansas fan is pretty straightforward. It is the fact that basically everything that had gone wrong through 3 games in league play actually was not really an issue on Tuesday night in Baton Rouge. So what we know about Arkansas coming into this game, they have not been a great 3-point shooting team. 9 of 20 from 3 on Tuesday night, so you can't blame the 3-point shooting. They were 9 of 20 overall. I think rebounding is increasingly becoming an issue. It feels like outside of Jonas Adu, guys just are not grabbing loose balls. Maybe that's a hustle play and effort. Well, guess what? They were at -2 in rebounding. They didn't get blown off the boards. It wasn't, they didn't, get out rebounded by 15 or 18 on the night. And so that has to be the most frustrating part. It's not just that you lost. It's that the reasons you have been losing weren't an issue. You shot the ball well. You rebounded well. By the way, we talked about it after the Florida game. You missed a million free throws against Florida, and if you make most of them, you win. Well, they were 11 of 13 from the free throw line. So you just sit there and it just gets more frustrating. LSU had more turnovers. But at the end of the day, what ended up happening? In big moments when you needed stops, you just couldn't get them. It wasn't just that Cam Carter had 27 points. It was that it just felt like you would get you. First of all, they were up big. They were up what Arkansas fans correct me. Was it 28-16 in the first half? And you cannot get stops when you need it. You cannot stop the bleeding. And you are now 0-4 in SEC play. And what I'll say is a couple things about this game. First off, it's just becoming increasingly harder to see the darkness, to see through the darkness to the light. Because I have always been somebody that has said, look, Cal hasn't always been great in January, but historically his teams have played well in February and early March, maybe not the SEC tournament, certainly not the NCAA tournament, but I go back to what I've said all along. Last year, they went 7-1 in their last 8 regular season games. That was included a win at Tennessee, included a win at Auburn, included a win over Alabama. But the problem becomes you're digging yourself a hole so deep that you could go 7-1 over the final 8. But if you're 0-8 to start, it's like it doesn't really matter. And so as you can see on the screen, they're 0-4 in league play, and they're just starting to dig themselves a hole that I don't think you can get out of. And I think the biggest concern for me is that if you can't beat LSU on the road, and it's no disrespect to LSU, I love Matt McMahon, had him on the show, I've said it a million times, but LSU probably is up there with maybe South Carolina as the least talented team in the SEC. And so if you can't beat LSU on the road, I just don't know what excitement you have to believe that you can go on a run. And this has been an issue that we've talked about with SEC basketball since before the season, and certainly once we realized how good this league was. I've told this story before, but I remember talking to a Big 12 coach about 3 years ago. They were okay during the regular season and got hot in the NCAA tournament. And what he told, I remember asking him, I said, so when did you get a feel that, maybe things would turn once you got to March? He said, Aaron, I always knew we had a good team. Our league was just so tough that I knew there was never going to be a moment where even when we're playing well, you're just never in the Big 12 at the time going to win 5 of 6, 6 of 8, 8 of 9. It's just not going to happen. And that's where we're at in the SEC this year. We're going to get to some of the other results from Tuesday night. But Florida looked unbeatable there for a week. All of a sudden, they lose to Missouri. Alabama looked unbeatable for a week. They lose to Ole Miss. And so the concern is, even if you start to play better, there's no stretch on the schedule that you sit there and say, oh my goodness, if we can just get here with this record, we can rip off 5 of 6. We can rip off 4 or 5. Now, I will say the next couple are really important for Arkansas. And listen, I know every game feels important for Arkansas at this point, and they are. But you have at Missouri. Missouri's a really good team. Missouri is, listen, I had them in number 7, number 8 in my SEC power poll the other day. They're not unbeatable, though. They kind of weirdly match up well with Arkansas. They don't have a ton of size. I think Arkansas is going to struggle with the bigger teams in the SEC, the Alabamas, the Auburns, etc. So that is a winnable game, but you got to win it. Obviously, beyond that, Georgia and Oklahoma at home before you go to play at Kentucky. So all of these games are winnable, but at some point you got to actually do it. And so if you're an Arkansas fan, I understand your frustration. You should be frustrated. And I do think this is officially time to hit the panic button. Now, big picture with Calipari, listen, I'll be honest. I've been a defender. It is very hard to defend. I don't know that today is the day that we just throw all the dirt on the grave. There are still, 14 SEC games left. And I do think it is frustrating for me, though, to watch, because I know a lot of people will say, oh, Torres, and we haven't even gotten to the comments yet. But I know people are going to be like, Torres, oh my goodness, you always defend Cal. No, I'm not defending Cal. This is unacceptable. And I think it's especially unacceptable given a couple circumstances. One, we know this is an NIL world, and we know that Arkansas is taking care of their players as much as anybody, okay? I think beyond just the NIL stuff, I think if this was even 2 or 3 years ago, you could kind of argue, well, it's a first year and it's a new this and it's a new that. Well, here's the bottom line. 3 of these guys played for Cal last year. By the way, they're probably the 2 most consistent players on the team, DJ Wagner and Adu Thiero. They played for him last year. And so you can't sit there and say, well, he needs more time and he needs this and he needs that. Listen, everybody that is a new coach in college basketball now deals with complete roster overhaul. You can't blame, well, they have no players from last year except for Trevin Brazile. when Kentucky literally has no players and they're a top 10 team that picked up their 5th win against a top 15 opponent on Tuesday night. Louisville, by the way, is playing unbelievable, 13-5. They've won 8 straight games. They have a completely new roster with a completely new coaching staff. USC with Eric Musselman feels like they're starting to figure it out. 2nd straight nice win. They beat Illinois the other day, and they beat Iowa on Tuesday night. And so, look, I could go on. And I do think at some point there is the big picture Calipari conversation. Where are we with him? Is he enjoying this? Does he want to do this anymore? I'm not ready to get there yet because there's still so much more season to be had. But at some point, you have to break through. At some point, you have to get a win of note, especially at league play. I don't think this is the worst team in the SEC, but right now they are not playing like anything other than that. So it's a fascinating time. It's certainly a frustrating time for Arkansas fans. And this was the first time that I really sit there and say, okay, you now need to worry quite a bit. I saw John Rothstein actually tweet this, like, we're not quite in danger zone, like 5-alarm fire, but we're pretty darn close. And I think that there is something to that because, again, 0-3 is one thing, but 0-4 at LSU, that's just a game that you've got to win. So I think if you're looking for any sort of silver lining, it's that you finally shot the ball well, you finally rebounded pretty well, but you got to get stops when it matters. You got to get stops and scores when it matters. You got to get stops and big rebounds when it matters, and they just aren't doing it right now. And I could sit here and sugarcoat it and say, well, this, that, the other thing. The only positive is, by the way, LSU still is a quad 1 loss because obviously the window for road games gets much bigger in terms of who is considered a quad 1 opponent on the road. So if you're looking for any sort of silver lining, it is that you still have yet to take a loss outside of quad 1. But at some point, you got to start winning these games, and you certainly have to start winning games that matter.